is Behind the Games from newoverlords.com, where we seek creators of all kinds to find out what's behind our favorite games. With your hosts, Jeff and Seema.
This is New Overlords Behind the Games podcast. From the Great Plains, I'm Jeff Illimek.
And from our Northeast studio, I'm Seema.
Today we're joined by Farley Chery, a professor at Worcester Polytechnic Institute and an expert on technical animation, among many other things. Farley, hello.
Hello.
So I'm excited. We're going to talk today about a few different things. We'll try not to get too technical. I don't want to show a bunch of trigonometry equations on the screen, but we'll talk about technical animation and what it is and things like forward kinematics and inverse kinematics, but just a bit to introduce it to everybody. We'll talk about the state of the tech industry and some things around there. And then we're going to definitely dive into your work on an initiative that I think is really amazing called Rigs of Color, which is an initiative to bring diversity of models and animation to the games industry in a really broad way. But to kick it off, why don't we talk about that idea of a technical artist? And Farley, if you could sort of define for us what is a technical artist, and we'll go from there.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so you're starting with the hardest question first, I see. So technical art is, so the way that it's best explained is someone who understands both the art pipeline and can use code to speed up processes and make new tools for artists and animators to use. So really, it's a case of when people come and ask me like, oh, what have I seen your work on? It's like, I honestly can't tell you because I'm not the actor in front of the screen. I'm not even like one of the VFX artists who made the explosions. I'm one of the people who will like make the tools to develop those things. My focus is as a character technical artist. So really, it's the things that make the characters move. So the process that I got into this on is called rigging. And then the other thing that most people might be really familiar with where technical artists are shining is not only just in VFX, but something called shader creation. And shaders are just basically the thing that helps define the graphics. It's what people see. So if you need to look at something like human skin, the way our eyes actually see human skin, there's like 6 or 7 different scientific principles that we have to not understand but mimic. So we're not as smart as the engineers. We're a little bit smarter than the artists in some ways. We're not as talented as the artists, but we're definitely more talented than the engineers in art. So it's weird. It's kind of like a mashup. And people who become technical artists, it's strange. Some of them were fine artists and they become technical artists because they just get really curious about how things work. Or you would have thought that they would have stopped at like the 3D modeling or the texture painting, but they go deeper. So it's really weird on like who's going to be a great technical artist or not.
And what's your case? Did you come from art or from coding?
Yeah, so I came from art. Only recently have I really started to get into coding. I think coding for technical artists has to come from passion projects. And I think like this is one of the things that a lot of schools aren't doing well to create technical artists is they're like, here's our computer science program, go make a database. And I took a course, or I took a few courses where every time I went in, it's like, we're going to make a database. It's like, I never want to make a database. And then I took a class where we had to create shapes or we had to store the controls and things that we made in one place and be able to pull from it and put everything in. And I did that and I loved it. And oh my God, I made a database.
Yeah.
They tricked you into making a database.
Yeah. So it's about perception.
So that idea of coming from a couple of different disciplines, it is a mix of the disciplines. And you said it's not as technical as engineering, but there are parts of technical art. In fact, stuff that you worked on that I would count as hardcore engineering.
I mean, totally.
The kinematics in particular. So for people that aren't familiar, and this comes from robotics and it comes from animation. I have bones connected to joints, and I can either say for each joint, I'm gonna move so many radians or so many degrees, and then move the next joint, then move the next joint. That's sort of like forward kinematics.
Yes.
Reverse kinematics says there's a whole chain, and I'm going to, because I want to clap my hands. I just know that my hand, the model's hand or the robot's hand is here. It needs to go here. I've looked at this. There's tons and tons of math and science to it. It seems easy from the outside looking in because we as humans just do this naturally. But to make a robot or to make an animated model from frame to frame do this stuff is very, very difficult. So I'm surprised that you said that you came into this from the art side, because I know some of your early work, and that's still in use today out there. It was really around the engineering side in some really breakthrough ways. So why don't you describe some of that kinematics work just a little bit? We're not going to, as I said, we're not going to show equations. Well, maybe I'll show some equations as B-roll in the video, but we'll go into too deep, but I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a really good explanation for it. So with forward kinematics basically being, you start from a base root and rotating all the way out to get something to like be in a specific place. With inverse kinematics, I almost like to think about it like a puppet string. So like a puppet string on the wrist, and as you move it, that natural joint is just going to bend and break. So like that's kind of the way that I started thinking about things. And so the reason why I came at it from a art standpoint was I really started getting into like 3D modeling. Like that was really my thing. And then I needed to make the models move. So I had, the way a lot of courses work is you learn 3D modeling, you learn animation, and then you finally learn how to make the rig. And the rig is not doing the thing that you want it to do. And I just couldn't live with it. So I started getting into rigging. And I didn't think that it wasn't art, because one of the people who I've always admired was Leonardo da Vinci, and how he was an accidental scientist and he did so many things based off his curiosity. So I think I always loved that sort of inventiveness. So I started getting good at rigging, which then meant I could no longer 3D model or animate, because as we had to work in group projects, I was forced to do all the rigging.
Sure.
And then I got into shaders. I got really good with shaders, but I realized the shaders weren't the thing that I really wanted to do. So I went back to looking at how to make good hair systems, how to just what was happening in the background. So it happened really slowly. Whereas some people, they come from coding and they're like, I can't keep doing this. And then they realize that everything we're doing on the art side is repetitive. And so then they start, coding all of that up. And so for me, I started to get into coding because the things I was doing was starting to grow infinitely more complex. And I just didn't want to do it 1,000 times over. So I said, I should probably really start to pay more attention to coding. Because anytime thing I developed, someone would make a plugin that was good enough, was really, why it's I don't need to code because you have all these other people. But then the stuff I started developing was, I think, beyond what I was seeing in industry standard, and gave me more room to experiment. So I just started getting more and more technical in that way. But I think one of the great things about the tool developers and tool development is I am only now starting to get into understanding the background math and everything. I really wish that art students from an early age, as soon as someone says they want to do art, I really wish people would introduce them to technical art, because that means that their math skills will improve and everything because of the way it's applied. I have dyscalculia, so I'm really bad in math. So it's really weird now that my son is learning math, and he's 2 grades ahead. So he's good. I tried to prepare him. I'm like, I have dyscalculia. You probably have dyscalculia. He does not.
Good. Fun.
But there are some principles that we are relearning at the same time, where I've been applying this stuff, so I have an intuitive knowledge on where something is going to be based on, where the math of like technical art is linear algebra, not calculus. So I've really been getting more into linear algebra, and the weird thing is I'm actually starting to enjoy it, which is not something that 16
You could have predicted.
yeah, 16-year-old me, 20-year-old me would never have said that.
That's really interesting. Just as an aside, linear algebra is the root of artificial intelligence. That's a lot of the way the common models work today. You're going to be doing that next, I'm sure.
But you've also made
linear algebra.
You've made an argument for something I've been saying for a long time, which is when you teach kids art, music, literature, it teaches a kind of problem solving, and it teaches them how to go on a journey, and it teaches them how to get where they want to go. But when you just focus on just reading, writing, arithmetic, it's a different path.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that math is not important. I'm just saying there's more than one way to get there. And you just illustrated that so beautifully.
Great. Great ways to put it together. The point that math is important to art, I think, is fascinating and really important as well. In all disciplines of art, in music, when I say, I'm a musician, I'm learning to play, and my music teacher says, okay, move up a third. Wait, there's math that's going on. There's reasons that these frequencies of these sounds sound good together. All right, well, let's mix some colors together and let's make some paint colors. And well, why am I mixing these two paint colors, and why does this complement this? Oh, because it's a bunch of math.
Right, because and it's physics too, because when the light comes in and
Physics and math, and same. I mean, the shader development. You talked about all of the different components that make up a shader, the emission and the diffusion and specular. Those are all pieces of math then that are affecting the way light bounces off of things.
But also, it's the observation to build the math, like looking at how shadows are. So it's not just the math. It's not just the art.
Yeah.
Pardon me.
The inspiration to want to become an expert in the math and science and apply it in that way, I think, to your point, Seema, it's...
Yeah, I mean, especially with the shaders, subsurface scattering, like that was like the biggest thing for the longest time. And now we're trying to speed up ray tracing. So yeah, I mean, I think like that to me is one of the things I think that WPI understood, where it's about practitioners and theory. So you'll sit through a class that is theory focused, but we try to do as much project-based learning as possible, which is weird because I always say like I am the last person who should be at a polytechnic school. But then I'm realizing like I'm probably one of the better people for it. Students come to me from all disciplines, and I'm teaching them new ways to think. Even my social issues classes, I'm not framing it in terms of any one social issues. It's more like how to argue with idiots. Is kind of like my approach. Like, let's first see what logical fallacies are. Let's look at the units of culture that we're producing, and let's just figure out are we designers trying to design a better world, or are we traditionalists that's trying to stick with the traditions that have only been passed on for the last 200 years. And this is why understanding history is like really important, because if you come to an understanding on like who humans were before we decided to have this marketing campaign, which is to like hate other groups of people, then you start to have a more open world. The one thing that I like to tell people is my role in life is to make games better. Like that's it. I want to make gameplay and games better. I want more people to play it. I want to get that person who is going to be recruited on Call of Duty to join a neo-Nazi group. I want them to start to stop and think like, when you are in line for the next Call of Duty, I would like there to be a game launch for a game that you normally wouldn't play at the same time. So there's that cute girl who you never thought would want to talk to you, and you guys are able to talk about games, and then you're able to go make babies, and then your babies are gonna have joysticks on their onesies, and you're gonna be a gamer family. Like that's what I want. Right. I want the best for you. I don't want you to be sitting there in the rain waiting for the next Call of Duty because you've never been on a date in your life. That's not what I want for you.
Yeah. And you've narrowed yourself down to
I like
to
how your
such a
character in
place.
that story is in the rain, waiting for Call of Duty.
Yeah.
That's the art, telling the story.
Yes.
Show don't tell.
Yeah,
You put the
exactly.
rain in, and that just communicates sadness.
Oh man, you guys are calling me out.
So you mentioned it. So how you got into this and where you're at right now. WPI, Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I had to have some training to say it. I visited it. I was there last week. So last week I was at PAX and I got to go to Worcester, and there was a meetup that was focused around Boston game developers and Boston indies. And there was students, had a bunch of tables set up. I got to see a bunch of the student projects. So talk a little bit about that. How you, well, I guess let's go back. Let's talk about origin story. That's the way I love to determine.
Yeah.
So how did you get started, and then how did you end up at Worcester?
Yeah. So I guess so this was one of the weird things that being at the GDC last week, after my presentation, someone came up to me who is an accidental academic like myself, totally being taken advantage of, telling me their story. And I'm just like, wow. I was thinking origin story. I might as well, I could have him come and tell you where he's at now. And that's where I was at. But I got into games by not doing as well as I wanted on my SATs, to be honest. God, what game?
Usually it goes the other way. When you're good at games too much, then you don't do good at school.
Yeah. So what happened was my friend got Final Fantasy VII, and I should have gotten sleep. I knew it.
Okay.
But I've always played games, but it was art.
Yeah.
Like I remember thinking it was really stylized, but it was so artistic and so beautiful, and it just made a different part of my brain just click. So I ended up going to school. I picked a school where I could major both in fashion design and animation, because in my head, fashion is art and games kind of are art. I still wasn't 100% sold. I was I knew games could be art, but I didn't think games were art. And then after studying fashion for a while, making a few outfits and learning more about that, just that the economies of it, I decided I would go the path of least resistance, something safer. Games use computers, and computers are the future. And I had to think why do I really want to be in fashion? It's well, I like the idea of making a woman feel beautiful, and also the idea of being around beautiful women. And I was that's not the way you make a good life choice.
Wow, that was pretty mature decision-making process for a young college student.
And I want to remind people, I was 19 at the time, so please don't come at me, because it's you are talking in a way. It's yes, this is also another time, and that is the only way my 19-year-old brain knew how to make choices. And so I chose games, which, as we know, is not that much safer than fashion design.
No. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's the thing. Either way, I chose wrong, right? But yeah, so after that, I started, what ended up happening as well is I thought that I could probably end up just doing fashion in 3D. That part where it was this is new, this is interesting. I wouldn't be beholden to the same fashion economy. I could do something different and wild and crazy. And so the big problem with wild and crazy ideas is you don't have funding. You don't come from a rich family. You don't get to do any of these things. But I stuck with 3D animation. And as I said, I just ended up getting into rigging because I just didn't like the way anything moved. And then after a while, it I just couldn't get a job. That was really it. So I was I might as well have just chose acting as my profession, because I was waiting tables. I worked at Apple retail. I was doing so much. And I got opportunity to teach at a for-profit, really bad school. And yeah, they're not here. They can't sue me. ITT. So ITT was like my first semi-break. So I started teaching there against their will. I kept updating the syllabi, so I wouldn't use the syllabi they gave me. Yeah, this comes
against their will. I was teaching good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Seema, you're gonna have a lot of laughs. This is like the story of me is, yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm gonna try to do. I don't like robbing people of their money. I know why I went to school. I know why other people are going to school. And it's to make a better life and to pull themselves out of poverty, or to live the American dream in a way that their passions won't allow them to go a safer career route. So I have to make them as good as I possibly can. And so I realized I wasn't aligned with that school, so I kept looking for jobs elsewhere. But one of the things that happened was, imagine that I'm at ITT and I helped two of my students get jobs. They were competing against people from Worcester, BU, like a lot of top schools, and they got jobs, which was great. The problem was, these were also jobs I applied for. So my students,
hey.
Yeah, exactly. So my students were getting jobs that I was applying for, and like at some point that just started ticking me off beyond anything, because they were also reaching back to me saying, I don't know how to do this work. And I was like, I was at the interview, with them, or not with them, but with the companies that they were applying to. They knew I could do the work. They didn't even ask me, because I was speaking to someone later. They're like, oh, they probably thought you were too expensive. It's like, you offer the job and then you negotiate. You don't just make assumptions for me. So education just became the easier path. And then I reached out to a company called Digital Tutors when I was about to give up. Like I was just going to just quit trying to make it in 3D. And then I told them, here's this thing that I did in college that I always thought was cool, and it's like it's like my signature move. And that
was the animation related, the kinematics related, rigging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rigging.
And they were blown away. And the funny thing is, the college that I went to, I remember hearing from the head of the animation department that giving me a degree would lessen the reputation of the school. The school is now closed. But
wow,
it's something. And then but the students that he was promoting they were all very similar in some ways that I am not. And it was the same thing with the students who are getting jobs. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't like to decry racism at every turn, but I'm going to scream it. It was racism.
Right.
It was some sort of racism or bias.
A barrier.
You don't want to cry it at every turn, but it's at every turn.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a fun game to play, right? You turn the corner, it's like, racism. It's like, no. It's like, I got you again. But yeah, so that's one of the things I had noticed. And so I'm in the Boston area. There are a lot of game companies. I wasn't getting hired. And I also realized there were just some jobs I started saying they're not going to hire me, and I didn't apply for. So when I showed the stuff to Digital Tutors, they were like, wow, they were blown away. I made a training video. I got the biggest check of my life at that time, which was $5,000. Now I won't get out of bed for that much money.
I like the sound of that.
Right? And so that to me is the most hilarious thing now. But what ended up happening was, people started contacting me. I threw away the idea of a portfolio. My portfolio now was, this company says I'm dope. And since this company says I'm dope, I'm dope. And then I put the work out. And, it was when I found out a few years later that one of the tech artists at Unreal, at Epic Games, they incorporated many of the aspects I created into the rigging system that they had already developed. So that was used on Gears of War 2. That was used on Fortnite. So I'm just like, wow, I am the poorest person I know to help companies make billions of dollars. And one of the companies that had contacted me was Valve, and Valve is just a horrible company. That's really all I could say there, because I spoke to a few people who they went through there's something cool that you're doing, and someone from Valve would contact you and then make it seem like a job interview, and then it wasn't a job interview. They just were like, "Oh, that's great, thanks for telling me," and then click, hang up. And so I think like that's one of the things in the industry. It's like really one of those people wonder like why their DEI isn't working or why something's not working. It's like, well, you're starting from being unfair as a base. So these other things to build equity aren't going to work because that's really not who you are.
Right.
Where I would have been like, I would have loved to be able to tell you like, and Valve, they made a connection for me where it was just like something simple where it's like they put me in contact with someone who published an article or
Right.
or something little, or they're like, oh, here's $1,000 for your time. And then that story would have been like, and then Valve gave me $1,000. I'm so happy right now. So, and this is one of the things that last week at the GDC, I saw a lot was people were really still talking about like this level of abuse of power, and taking advantage of people. So, so this is why I give all shout outs to Epic, but it is a case that I've seen that a lot. And that's really my origin story. The shout out from Jeremy Ernst, in the letter he wrote, basically saying, yes, of course I used your and that's basically all I had asked was like, hey, it would change my life if you said that you use this in your system. I could spin that into a career. And this was the same thing I told Valve, and where they didn't even email me back, where it's like I had an hour conversation with you, walking you through how my enhanced IK system worked. You could have at least just written the email, but Epic Games did it.
And that, I mean, it's invaluable, that kind of reference, that kind of recommendation. Mm-hmm. There's a whole, so for people that aren't familiar, people that are thinking about games, people that are thinking about their careers in general, you look into LinkedIn, there's a section down at the bottom that says recommendations. And what you can do and what you should do as a professional in the industry is after you work with someone, you can trade recommendations, or you can ask them, hey, if this was valuable to you, if this was useful to you, could you write a recommendation? Could you write a note? And it doesn't have to be in LinkedIn. It could be in an email. It could be in a document somewhere else. But that, as you said, portfolio is one thing. Getting recommendations from other professionals in the industry that say this person knows what they're doing. They've demonstrated this capability, not just this portfolio stuff you see, but in working with other people. That is super, super valuable in any field, in any career to move you forward. HR departments, when they ask for references, those kinds of references don't work this way. Those kinds of references basically, in fact, in a lot of ways, are completely useless, because the HR departments for the companies that they're calling the references from limit themselves from a legal perspective to only saying, yes, they worked at this company from this time to this time, and they would be rehired if they wanted to come back or not.
Yeah.
And those are the only two questions that they'll answer anymore these days, as opposed to that kind of recommendation system. So I think that's a huge lesson to take away for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, like to give everyone listening an idea, like this. I mean, this is, there's no other way to put it except I own a house. I own my cars. My kids, we debate whether we want to send them to private school or not, but we're able to go on vacations. Like, we're able to have a pretty good life now. It's for that reason. It really was. I just said, anything you could do to recommend me a write-up or something. I knew that, you know what? I don't have anything that has my back. I could use this as my hammer for every job. And I have, And it's not someone who I meet with like every 30 minutes every month or anything like that. It is just someone who's on this one time, 4 minutes of their life. That's all they did. And it changed the trajectory of mine.
Yeah, that's excellent. The best recommendations, and another lesson for everyone out there in the industry or trying to get in, are the ones where someone puts you in contact with someone else. It's the references.
Mm-hmm.
It's people connecting you. It's talking to people. So you need to get out there. You need to do things. You need to have big ideas, but big ideas are hallucination without implementation. So unless you've implemented those ideas, telling someone your big ideas is mildly interesting. Having demonstrated some skill, having demonstrated some capability, having demonstrated some implementation of those ideas, and then having someone else be able to talk about that, hugely valuable. So WPI, I had fun there. I liked it. I'm not all that familiar. We've talked to a couple people at a couple different game schools. We've talked about WPI in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Kate Olguin has been on the show and has talked about WPI. Seems like a great place. And what is your thought on the state of game schools, where they're at right now, where they're going, and what makes a good game school?
Yeah, so this is one of those, my marketing department would probably hate me for this, but game schools are really one of the things where I'm like, they're 50-50. I do believe some people out of high school, they do the work, that their level of quality is as good as many people who graduate game schools. With that said, though, I think that even if those guys went to game schools, not even for the education, but like just to talk to the professors, to get clarification on their ideas and how to develop, I think that they'd be a little bit better. But if they're able not to get a job, then it's going to happen in the workforce. So my thoughts with game schools are kind of like the way I think about everything else, where, why are you paying me to train you? It's because I have made all the mistakes. I have figured out ways to think about different problems so that you don't have to work for 3 years to solve something. I could just tell you, here's the solution. And then you could test it out, but you start to have the methodology for you to execute your work. So in terms of game schools, I think there's a lot of game schools that work like that. There are a lot of great game schools out there. But with that said, there are a lot of them that, they're just not good. As I said, I started teaching in one. I started teaching in like 2 or 3.
I mean, I think that's true in every field. There's really bad nursing schools out there. And I think it's on you as the prospective student to try and figure out which are which, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think like the worst part is like, so schools like WPI, they're not gonna hold your hands to say like, all right, so here's what you need to do, which actually bothers me because a lot of like the for-profit schools, they would, where, I went to a for-profit school and the reason was they kind of showed me like, all right, so here's where you could go for loans. So when I went to get my MFA, I had a better idea of who I could turn to and how to navigate the system, something that filling out the FAFSA form never did. So I think when looking at game schools, reputation will matter in terms of for-profit game schools that I think are great. The only one that comes to my mind is Full Sail. I think there's one called the Dave School as well. And so the reason why I think I need to give them a shout out is because they tend to be a little bit cheaper and they might go by faster. So it could help students get out into the industry more quicker. And I know you probably did not think this would turn this way where I'm like advocating for other schools and stuff. But I always say, so who am I trying to uplift? And I'm always trying to uplift those who are in like, I guess, like the lower middle class, those who are just above poverty, because I think that they have a lot of stories and unique perspectives that can make games better. Because, I mean, games are about conflict usually or something. And they understand social conflict. They have different ways of viewing the world because of the class that they were just brought up in and the way that they're coming up. They get in their story when they are able to like sit there and say, "Oh my God, I'm working at Bethesda Games." They've lived their hero's journey. And I feel like that's something that's important. But in terms of like schools like WPI, University of Utah, RPI, they all have great programs. The way they go about things are different. But I think overall, the crazy thing in the state of game schools right now is that a lot of them have closed their doors. New schools are starting to shift their programming because games are about to become a $200 billion industry.
Yeah.
And it's one of those scary things where it's almost like film schools in like the 1980s. I'm hearing this from the people who I work with, where everybody developed a film program because films were the next big thing. So I think that's going to be that's the part that is a little bit worrisome, is that people might not be getting the best of the best, even if they go to like one of the top tier schools.
Because of this proliferation of programs, they're going to be starting at the ground floor. It's going to be harder for them to get the talent to run the program, at least initially. They're going to have to be doing some work to put it together in a way that's cohesive for students. Now, I think you alluded to it, the idea that some of these schools don't hold your hand. And as I think it's also very important for anyone who's using a university to, and I think degrees are good because there's a lot you can learn at getting a degree and going to a university beyond what you're already good at or what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where people need to stretch. So as you said, you got experience in dealing with databases. You probably on your own wouldn't necessarily have gone down that path because they're boring and
yeah, exactly.
But you get working with other disciplines, you get exposure to these different components of the pipeline. You get exposure to potentially other liberal arts and sciences that aren't even related to games at all because they're part of the curriculum. Use that
that's the
time.
part I wanted to hit on. It's so a lot of the early game designers and level designers, they had history and English degrees. Why? Because they understood conflict, they understood drama, they understood storytelling.
Yeah.
So understanding like religion and philosophy and all of those things just make for a richer life. So one of the things I tell my students as well is, you want to do something, you want unique ideas, go watch documentaries. Like, a lot of people don't understand. The documentaries will like teach you so much in a compressed amount that you don't have to read every book under the sun to become a well-rounded person. I think that certain games are like that as well, where you play them and you learn a little aspect of history, and that makes things more interesting. So I think my thoughts overall on game schools, like the more trade school types that kind of help get you in the door, those are great. But what if you can't get that liberal arts education? You should be doing things that make you uncomfortable. You should be learning things that make you uncomfortable, because that's who I know I want, and that's who a lot of people want as leads. Because if you just go in and you get the trade school education, but you have no interest in anything else, then that means that you probably will pitch one of two games, which revolves around, one or two stories. It's going to either be Lord of the Rings or Star Wars.
Right.
And those have been done.
We don't love Lord of the Rings and Star Wars.
but those games already exist.
Right. And we don't need every game to.
Right.
So I think this is a good pivot into the diversity in games and some of the work on Rigs of Color and where that's going. I'm a big proponent of finding something interesting and different and new, and seeing diverse ideas represented, seeing diverse talent and art that's appearing before me on the screen, diverse ideas that are represented through the gameplay. And we're getting to a point where the tool sets and the platforms are very, very powerful and very, very advanced, but almost too advanced. Because if I give someone, a set of paint jars and a canvas and say, paint something, each person in the room is going to do something wildly different.
Mhm.
If I give you a set of stamps and an ink pad, and there's 5 stamps, and you're going to stamp something on a piece of paper, it's going to be much less diverse representation of what comes out. Some of what I think we're starting to see, and you can see this when you even look at games, you can say, oh, that's a Unity game. Okay, here's another Unreal Engine game. Here's the Manny default mannequin that's been reskinned and dropped into another game. And I can see it. And maybe the game is still fun, and maybe it doesn't matter because that's not a big part of it. But this lack of diversity in all of these games that are coming out, just in how it's implemented, I think is a limiting factor. And there's a lot of opportunity. So why don't you talk a little bit about what Rigs of Color is, and that idea, this is just one aspect of bringing that kind of diversity into the games industry as a whole, which I think will make some amazing new things for us.
Yeah, so Rigs of Color, it's I don't know, I guess it was like a project idea I had for a long time, but I kind of ended up moving away from it because at some of the first academic institutions I was at, so not the ITTs, the first like actual academic institutions didn't consider it research. And so I was more trying to fit in than anything. But then as I got comfortable at WPI, as I was like, when it was like, they were like, look, we love you. You're not going anywhere. What do you want to do passionately? It was funny. I didn't even think of it off the top of my head. It wasn't until I had a student mention that they wanted to do an animation, and they showed me the script, and it was funny as hell, but they could not do it with the characters available. White people saying this would have been bad. All right. So think about like an episode of like Insecure or something like that. It's like
Right.
you need to do something different, and just turning the characters brown somehow made it worse.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
It made it much worse. So the idea then, when they were talking to me about it, my response was, yeah, that's the way it's always been. If by this point there should be someone who's able to fix that, and I'm like, one sec, my skill set is perfectly suited to fix this. So I decided to come up with that with Rigs of Color. There are a few people out there who have been making diverse character rigs. They've kind of been doing it on the side for a while. I really feel like academia is like the best place to take care of this. People give academics money for stupid things, and I call them stupid. Some of people might not, but I don't know how many times I've seen things in like grants that I've like lost, where, the people who won are researching the effects of racism on this small community in Minnesota, or this community in Tennessee, or this community in Canada. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm going to say that it's probably bad, and that it's probably the same thing that we've seen 1,000 times. But they have research questions. Whereas me, I'm like, all that research you've been doing, this starts to solve it, at least in some way. So the idea is just to create a diverse set of characters in multiple different styles, look at what's available online, and try to make characters of color that could work with these characters. So that's like on the more artistic aspect. On the technical aspect, I've looked at everything that is considered industry standard, and I've tried to push beyond them. So my hope is when Rigs of Color comes out, the way that the feet are controlled are really different than what is currently standard. So some of the rigs that I've compared it to, you have to pay like $50 for. We want to try to give everything out for free. We want to be able to function mostly on donations, and we are just trying to get more grants to support the creation of this. But even it is still a start, because what we hope to focus on is creating a hair plugin. Because when I saw Elden Rings, all that occurred to me is, I hate these people. And then the second thought was, I can fix this. And so it's So the idea is just creating something that makes it easy to create a vast amount of hairstyles. That is what we want our. So after the launch of Rings of Color, the idea isn't that, oh, we're going to end it. It's going to be, we're going to move on to this. But we've developed a pipeline. We have a school in Iowa. So I have someone I met at last year's GDC named Taylor Carlson. And so she's taken like all the materials I produced for Rings of Color as a curriculum, and then she's applied it to her program in Iowa, where she was asked to start a game program. So she's been able to like cut through that idea of, oh my God, how do I start something? It's like use people who are already doing it. And so we talk all the time about like what's happening with her students' development, and they are doing an amazing job. Like her students are starting to get placed very rapidly. And it's based off of an anti-racist curriculum, which people are like, well, I need to teach art. I don't have time for this. It's like, but I've proven at 2 different schools now that 1, it could be based on anti-racism. 2, it could also benefit industry more, because what happens is there's more check-ins that look more like industry. So students are getting feedback based off of their art. They're getting paintovers, and they're being sent back so that they learn how to make appealing characters. So instead of saying that I'm going to do this instead of this, I was able to do both. And it's getting great results. So Rings of Color, I don't know what it is now, because the thing that people are talking to me about now are it as a curriculum. So if this can become the basis for curriculums going forward, I would consider that a success as well, because that means that more people are producing character variation for their portfolios, which I think really helps them and the industry. And I'm still hoping to launch, but I'm just starting to see how, I guess, how much of an innovator I am in this area. Like what I'm doing, I don't consider it innovation at all. This is like common sense, but nobody's doing it.
But it is. But it is. And I think I'd love to see it be successful on all of those, all of those dimensions. The one of providing the rigs, making them available for free. You've got this burgeoning indie industry where they need to have tools available where they're just grabbing a model from somewhere and they don't have any money anyway, and they just want to make an interesting game. Being able to get interesting models, diverse models, to make an interesting game, to tell a story, I think would be very important. On the other side, you've got these big game companies, giant game companies. They're going to develop all of their own assets. However, if you've got people coming in that have used this idea and what goes into creating Rings of Color as a curriculum, and they understand the techniques for here's a culture, here's a diverse character, here's how you go about creating a rig and creating a model and making this kind of character come to life. That's not just taking a skin color and sliding a color shader on it. Then those people will flow into those kinds of companies and make the industry better that way. So I think both of those dimensions are great places for this to go. I personally love the idea of Epic. Epic should call you up, because there are 2 models. There's a male-ish version and a female-ish version of their default mannequin that are being used for nearly infinite number of games right now that are being created even today, this morning. Having a more diverse set of even of those to start with. I mean, at least at the very root, at the very start, put a little bit more diversity into the default setup for what's available to you when you grab something just because you need a model would be wonderful. So that's another place I think that this could be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I've been looking at some of the smaller names for grants and things. I think Epic is going to be one of the groups that I reach out to. And as I said, Epic gets love from me, like just based off of one person looking out for me. But I've spoken to them about different ideas before, and so they kind of helped steer me to the idea that I should probably work more on stylized characters and super realistic. Without saying anything, they were just like, I probably wouldn't go super realistic because there are probably things that will be released in a couple of years. And then it's like metahumans. I'm like,
yes, metahumans
I was like, thank God I didn't go down that path. So I mean, I think that a lot of people at Epic, they're receptive to these ideas. They're funding a lot of amazing things across the board. So hopefully Rigs of Color ends up being one of them. The funding struggle is one of the things that slowed us down. I was hoping to launch this summer, but we had, I had thought I'd be able to pay students throughout the school year. The funding had dried up, so I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer. But also the other, why it's been delayed a bit is good news. It's because there's a company called Rigging Dojo. Like when it comes to learning the latest techniques, they are absolutely amazing. I was starting to work on how to create the facial rig. As I said, it's not just starting with what everyone's using. I'm trying to change every aspect or push every aspect to provide more freedom, provide more movement, provide more secondary automation. So it's just easier and faster to rig, because the entire point of this isn't just diversity. I also want to prove that people who are pushing these things do want to make the industry better, because I'm trying to make people's lives better. I want some aspects to become the new industry standard. And as a professor, I'm hoping that after I release, I'm going to be able to start to freely release different things. So here's how we achieve this. Here's how we achieve that. And the guys at Rigging Dojo, for the facial setup, they taught me how to do it. One of the things I loved about them is they said, "Hey, we're Rigging Dojo. This is what we do. This is how we can help you. Do you want to take a course with us for free?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I went into it thinking maybe I'll pick up one or two things, but I went to school. I seriously had to learn new ideas, and then I started applying those new ideas not only to the facial rig. I went back and I looked at some of the full body stuff we're doing, some things that I got stuck on where I'm like, I might be able to do this. So more research is being done there. But I mean, this is what I'm saying. It not only did it not cost them anything, but I then said, hey, it makes more sense for me to take some of my limited amount of funds and take a second class with you than it does for me to spend the next 9 months trying to launch something. So they actually ended up making a profit from the work that they did.
And potentially opened up collaboration in the future in a way that I think is probably going to be multiplicatively beneficial to both.
Yeah, and it's and I'm here, so if anyone wants to get into games and they can't afford a full college degree, I totally recommend Rigging Dojo as a tech artist. You'd at least be able to enter the ground as a rigger. I do think you need to code to be a tech artist. That's the one thing. But yeah, I have nothing but positive words to say about them. And I think this is the thing a lot of companies need to understand. When you do things like this, you'll get people who will be strong detractors from you, or they will be, or they will sing you praises. And so the only reason why I could do all of this is I'm kind of locked into academia. My level of pay is the same that is in industry. I can call Valve out for their horrible practices because I don't need them and I'm never going to need them. I can sing epic praises and I don't really need them at this point. So
you don't have to be careful about
it's one of those, I don't have a care in the world whether they succeed or fail.
You
they
can
can't
just say what
blacklist
you mean.
me. So for me, it's one of those, if anyone wants my opinion, they know that it's not jaded or based on the fact that I might I might need these people later. It's based off
Right.
of
It's not couched in these connections. I don't want to burn any bridges, so I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't work for this company that you totally shouldn't work for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on. But Rings of Color, like I said, so from a technology perspective, I'm really excited because some of the enhanced IK work that I had done, we improved it on it. So it used to be if you went past certain points, I mean, obvious points that a human body can't move, the rig broke.
Right.
And now it actually will fix itself back. There are so many different things with our auto clavicles. Those were improved. The auto hip was the one thing when I gave it to digital tutors, which was like, look, this works 80% of the time. So that's why there's an off switch. Now the new one works like 95% of the time. And we're pushing, getting it more into working a little bit more with the back. When you rotate the feet, the knees will automatically orient themselves the right way, no matter where you put the foot. And then that doesn't flip out. So there's so many things that have been improved for the final artist that the rig doesn't have that, quick break that makes them go, what's happening? And they just have to tilt it back a little. It just, it's stable, everything works. And then the other thing that I discovered is, even though it is as advanced as it is, because one of the things that Rigging Dojo taught us was how to check for optimization. The rig is fully optimized, so you're going to get a lot of fast playback. So it's not going to run slow because it's sophisticated. The sophistication is going to make you work faster.
Right. So again, for the last couple minutes, people listening to this, that's the core of technical art. It's understanding all of these little bits and pieces and how they all fit together, and adding layers of complexity to the rig and the model and the responsiveness of the model, so that an animator and an artist can just say, well, I need the foot to move here. And it ends up looking like a human when they move in the motion, because there's a whole bunch of micro movements that happen when you take a step. And it's not just your foot moves here and whatever your knee is connected to just follows it. There's a lot more that goes on.
I wish there were rigging systems for real life that would make me a good dancer. I'm kind of hung up on the term auto hip now. I want someone to
So that's the crazy thing that you mention it. So every time I'm rigging, and I don't want to seem like one of those crazy people, but when I'm doing my work, I am definitely a crazy person. When I've been rigging the feet, where I'm just I need this to move a certain way, I am trying to imagine somebody trying to animate Misty Copeland moving. I am obsessed with Misty Copeland, in that way. I haven't stopped her. I just need to put that out there. But I don't know. I also think there's a sort of beauty there, because I was part of the AXO move. The AXO Foundation by the NAACP, and they had funded a lot of projects for Black and minority youth. So I had a chance to actually see Misty Copeland once perform, and I fell in love with the movement. And when I started animating, that's what I always thought of, was how, and this is why I hated the rigs I got, because it's I want to be able to almost real time animate a dancer.
Do what she does. Yeah. I mean, the importance of having a muse, right?
Yes.
Right.
But then for the stuff I'm working on in the back, I am thinking of Simone Biles and Gabby Giffords. Is it Gabby Giffords? I might be confusing her with the congresswoman. There was a Gabby who was a gymnast.
Yes.
So that one. And Miles Morales. So it's all of these acrobats and what happens in the back. So one of the things that I'm introducing is the idea of center of motion instead of center of gravity. And we'll see how the industry reacts to it. But I've been able to get just some amazing level of movement without having to compromise or use a lot of tricks. And so I don't know. I think it's interesting where it's like I'm looking at black bodies to make this rig. They are my muse, and this is going to go out into everybody's hands. And if it becomes industry standard, it's just going to be another stamp onto, all right, so why are we arguing against diversity? And then the thing that a lot of people don't know is most of the rigs out there already uses the work of a guy named Aaron Hawley, who came up with stretchy planes. And because of the way that technical art works, it's not academic. We don't sit there and with our rigs and go, this is inspired by the work of so and so. Like, we don't have to. God, I forget what they call it in academia. Well, cite. We don't have to cite every single idea and where we got it from.
There's no bibliography at the end.
Yeah, exactly. But if there was, Aaron Hawley and then what is it? Delano Atheist, they would be cited like crazy, because Delano, he taught for not rigs of color, digital tutors for like 7 years. And so if you went to a bad school and you knew digital tutors existed, you actually learned from him. That's an incredible amount of citations that just goes through the Black community. And on top of that, like, there are quite a few people from the Hispanic community who have made significant contributions as well. So, like, I think like that's one of the things that I also want to bring to light with Rigs of Color is I do want to cite these people for the stuff they've created and the things that they've done, so people have to acknowledge that these people were here. Yeah. And not were here, they're still alive, thankfully.
And continue to proliferate that out into the industry and going into the future.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about that, maybe to wrap it up in our last couple minutes, if we think about the future, there are like new tools that are becoming available, things like AI. People keep being worried that AI is going to take over or do or break things that we've got going on right now. And I don't think so. I think it might be a tool working in concert that makes things better. But you'll have that. You'll have the potential for this growing industry. What are your thoughts a little bit in just where the future of the industry is headed, where the future of the tools and tech art is headed? What big ideas do you think are out there that still need to be touched on and explored a little bit more?
Yeah, so I remember in 2011, someone had asked, what's the future of technical art in games? And my answer is the same then as it is now. Holodeck. I think we're always trying to get to a holodeck. That would be the greatest game playing experience, right? But when we do that, we also have to acknowledge, like, all right, what would go wrong with holodecks? And
I would never leave.
That's one, but also the Orville. I don't know if you guys ever seen it. It's a great show.
I got to go watch that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an episode where someone gets an illegal holodeck program because it's not safe for work, let's just say, and it gives the entire ship a virus. And it's like, yeah, of course holodecks are going to be used for that as well. So I think every time we look at new technologies and the direction we're going, the question I always ask is, how can this be used for evil? And then I have to decide, do I want to unleash this? So like with the enhanced IK, I developed it for my students. Like, I developed it first for myself to speed some things up, but at that point I was only doing the automatic shoulders. The auto hips were made so that my students at ITT could compete from people from the top schools. And so when I released it, it wasn't students who picked it up, it was professionals. So their work got faster. So the gap got moved even further. And so as I look at AI, I think the question that we need to ask is this going to benefit the workers or the company? Because I would hope that it would give, yes, there's going to be less workers and that's going to benefit the company. I don't think there's any doubt that that's the direction things are going. But the workers who are there, are they going to be given some of their time and their lives back? Or are they going to be expected to do more to keep the job because the AI is doing half the job anyway, and then they could hire anybody to come do it, so that the skills are valued less. I feel like that is like one of the big issues. I feel like AI in games, I hope that we could connect to something like a chat GPT that is really focused on knowing where it is in the story, so that you could buy one game and play it for like the next 5 years because it has infinite replayability, where the person who was your sidekick is like the antagonist the entire time in one playthrough, and you're like, oh no, but I love you.
Maybe you could even, as the player, dictate what parts of it because what's replayable is different for every person.
Yeah,
right.
Like for me, replayable means there's some familiarity, but for someone else, it might mean there's new wonder.
Even connecting it back to your idea of the holodeck and the idea of how much do I want it to impact and what levers do I want to pull. The beauty of the idea of the holodeck, I think, is founded in technical art. And what you do with a holodeck, the Star Trek holodeck, is you describe what you want it to create. Create a 1920s.
Right. I mean, you describe it with
blah, blah, blah.
with like 5 words, and then it just knows after that.
But
it's super Dolly.
Yes.
Right. It's the technical art then that rigs that and creates it and connects everything together and creates a system around it, and that's all founded
also
in
a knowledge
art.
of history and literature, because how else can you do the speakeasy?
So to your point, Seema, I think to be able to say how much do I want the flexibility, or to go off the rails, and even Stable Diffusion works this way. There's a slider that says I'm going to give you a prompt, and depending on where I put this slider is how much you could feel free to go off the rails and do something weird. And if I slide it way to the left, then you keep it pretty close to what I'm telling you. If I slide it to the right, then go crazy. And my sidekick could, to be the antagonist and stab me in the back, or becomes an alien and explodes in episode 3. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's
where that can go.
That's the fun thing. And Seema, I did not know you were that much of a Trekkie. I anytime you want, I love talking to other Trekkies. Because when you said speakeasy, I'm like, I know exactly what you're speaking about. But I mean, that's my point. This is like, so as I look at things, and I look at the technology and everything, I want it to be used in a way that brings us closer, like, together, because how much bigger are our tribes when we're thinking about our psychographics than our demographics? Right.
Actually, that's a great point.
The tribe becomes so huge and so much more fun.
Jeff and I are both part of a gaming community that we help run, and one of the rules we have as a community is we never share about politics or religion. And when you said that about tribe, it made me realize that has enabled us to have a really big tribe, because we connect on all the different levels. Now we're available to connect on different levels. We don't have to separate off because you believe the wrong thing,
Right. And it opens everyone up to new ideas, and maybe the people that have the wrong ideas, by where they've aligned themselves, can be part of a bigger tribe that
exposed to something different. Yeah.
Exposed to much.
I just never really looked at it that way before.
Yeah. I mean, I think like that for me as a technical artist, I think I land in a different place where it's not just art and technology, it's also culture that I'm constantly thinking about as well, where it's like, so how do we realign us to who we really are? Like that's been a big part, where one of the ways I love to use AI is in moderation, where it's like, if we know certain people have certain views, can we have an AI chatbot like de-radicalize them? Like, will the chatbot know this is going to take 6 years, and they will do the 6 years worth of work? Like things like that to me are some of the more interesting aspects, But one of the things that I've been looking at is using AI to help teach artists how to code, because the biggest thing that the thing that stops most people from learning how to code, because coding is actually quite simple once you know the rules. But then there are libraries where you don't know the name of things, or you don't know how this thing is supposed to be used.
Yep.
So then you have to become a better coder to start coding closer to the system processes, and that's when things get crazy difficult. But you have languages like Python, which are powerful, but honestly, you could use pre-made libraries, and you get better the more you do it. But there's some things that I was trying to code for Rigs of Color where it would have taken me 5 weeks to figure out like one thing in one line because the documentation was so bad. And what the AI was able to do was to show me like, so this is what you'd use. And I'm like, why would I use that? And it showed me how the flags and arguments were used. And I went back to read and said, how the hell was I ever supposed to figure that out?
Right. Exactly. And the reason it can do that is because it has a whole bunch more source material that it would take you a year to read through, including the code base itself, to decompose the code base, as opposed to that terrible wiki or API reference. I mean, even Unreal, as awesome a platform as it is, you go and read their API reference, 5.1 API. Here's a thing. It's called, combobulate. And you look at the definition on the wiki page and it says, combobulate combobulates.
Yeah, exactly.
Guys, what am I supposed to do with this?
So I think like that's one of the great things too. It's like ChatGPT understands Unreal. Like, it knows it well enough so that it can help guide you through how to solve some problems that you're having. So for me, what I think when people are like, oh, it could code, and it's like, it doesn't do the greatest job, but its sample codes have helped me speed things along. Right. So the thing that it does really well, as far as I'm concerned, is it goes through our human jargon, and it has a way to communicate with us better in simpler terminologies. And I'm trying to have students write their cover letters with ChatGPT, which some people's like, why would you do that? Well, I know people who I've told about this who they're not techies at all. They're like, no, this is dumb. But they decided to get into it because they were like, I don't want to have. They're looking for work and they're like, I don't want to have to write this cover letter. Cover letters are stupid. Everything is in the resume. Like, I think we've all been there.
Right.
But this person works in HR and has read a bunch of cover letters. And as they're putting out their own work with their cover letters, they're not getting called back. They had ChatGPT apply to the same job, and ChatGPT is speaking the same language. And the thing that I keep saying is,
right.
All right, because the people who I've been looking at where ChatGPT has been able to write better have been either they've been younger, they have been black or brown, and it's like, does ChatGPT speak middle-aged white guy? Is that why they're getting the callbacks now?
Yeah, and it's getting so good that you can ask it to speak in different, coded different ways. And I think that's the brilliance. And I think that's where we'll be able to start to use it more. You don't have to use all of its output. You can learn from what it provides you, because it understands who the multitude of communication styles. And you as a technical person might look at your resume and say, all of the technical details are right here. It explains everything. That might not be the way that the person that you're applying to communicates and understands. And they need a paragraph and a narrative and a story that's told. And that's what the AI and ChatGPT can help you do. And then if you go further and ask it for a particular style and say, well, I know the people that work at this organization are kind of this way. They're very analytical and they're data oriented. How would I write a cover letter that is for a bunch of accountants? Okay, well, that's going to be slightly different. And now I can show you what that looks like, and you can be inspired by it. And you can take that into whatever you do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's brilliant the way that you said it, because I think it's all of those things, and I think the only thing that I've been trying to figure out is more of the visual creators. Do have some students who are giving prompts and then taking the work and then doing massive edits on it. But I think that for me, the concern for art, especially 2D art, is always it's ridiculously undervalued. And I see that it's getting undervalued even more now that it used to be when Photoshop first came out, it's like, my 10-year-old could do this. Why do you need a degree in design? And it's like, 10-year-old might be able to come up with something good every now and then, but they're not consistent.
Right.
But now with the AI, it's like, I don't even need a 10-year-old anymore. So what happens there?
Yeah. And even there, I think the idea of art is it communicates an idea. And that's one thing that the AI cannot do. And then communicating the idea in your personal voice is something the AIs cannot do. So again, you can use it as a tool to make some baseline bricks that you could stack up into a pile in an interesting way. But the giving artists AI as a partner to be able to do more interesting things, I think, is where the brilliance will come from, because you need the artist's voice and the ideas and the story that they're trying to tell.
Yeah. And so I don't think we're going to be replaced there anytime soon. Maybe not until we have holodecks.
Until we have holodecks. All right. This has been amazing.
Yeah,
I know
it
we've
really
gone
has.
a little bit long here. We've touched on so many topics. I'll try to divide this up into chapters. I'm not always able to get that into that, but I think there's a lot of places that people can skip around in this talk that we're
I'm hoping
so
we'll
many
be able to
brilliant
talk you into coming back again, Farley. This has been
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. No, this is fun. And honestly, if there's ever a Star Trek game that comes out, I think we should be on top of it.
Okay. All right. We'll definitely do that.
All right.
Until then, we'll definitely stay connected also on Rigs of Color. I want to see where that ends up. And
oh yeah, I almost forgot because it just happened.
Yes.
So we can actually accept donations through the site now.
Ah, awesome.
Great.
Yeah. So,
And what is the site?
rigsofcolor.com.
Rigsofcolor.com.
Mhm.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
It has a
I think
fantastic gallery, by the way, so check it out. Yeah.
And we'll put some of those links in the show notes as well, and when we send this out on the social media. So.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yep. And we will talk to you soon.
All right. Take care, guys.
So long.
This has been a New Overlords production. For more, please visit newoverlords.com for video, subscribe and feed links, and other ways to help the show.